For the March 26th, 2015 Thursday evening litigation experience practicum course, I am submitting my assignment via YouTube because I am not physically in the country at the time. I am addressing issue number 3 with regard to the memo to be discussed for oral argument. May it please the court, my name is Casey Frank, and I represent plaintiff Maggie Polizzi in this dispute. With regard to the third issue for oral argument today, plaintiff respectfully requests this court deny the motion for summary judgment on the basis of Claim 4 defamation because Ms. Polizzi was defamed by Simon Clark and there is more than sufficient evidence in the record to prove it. However, if this court should determine that there is not sufficient evidence in the record to support a defamation claim by Simon Clark, then under Federal Rules of Civil Procedure 56D, plaintiff requests that it be granted time to remediate the insufficiency of such evidence. However, beginning with the information that is currently available in the record, Maggie Polizzi presents evidence that she was defamed by Simon Clark. In particular, there are 4 instances of a letter of recommendation being provided by Simon Clark to potential employers, and the after effects of those letters of recommendation on the hireability of Maggie Polizzi in those positions. Specifically, in the summer of 2001, from June to July of 2001, there were 3 letters of recommendation described by one of those potential employers, Roger Warren of Melanson and Capps, as, although it was not negative, I wouldn't call it a positive letter either. His, Simon Clark's, evaluation of Ms. Polizzi was apparently lukewarm. This particular letter of recommendation, as has been noted previously and is available for analysis in the record, seems to restrict evaluation of Maggie Polizzi's analytical skills. It does not address her academic accomplishments, including her participation on the Law Review Journal and graduating at the top of her class. And on this basis, it appears to be a lesser representation of Maggie Polizzi's qualifications and abilities as an attorney in a litigation department or firm. Now, starting with Roger Warren's receipt of this lukewarm letter of recommendation, he decided, despite the letter of recommendation, to consider Ms. Polizzi for a position at the firm, based, according to his testimony, on her excellent resume and the fact that she did receive a letter of recommendation from Simon Clark. He pursued it further with Simon Clark to get the specifics of his evaluation of Maggie Polizzi, and that is indicated in Exhibit 9, which are phone records. He called Mr. Clark to discuss Ms. Polizzi specifically. And now, he also indicates in his later testimony in Exhibit 18 that he did eventually speak with Simon Clark regarding Maggie Polizzi, and specifically says, and I quote, "Absent the information from Simon Clark, we certainly would have interviewed Ms. Polizzi for a position with our firm." This particular statement makes a causal link between Simon Clark's statements regarding Maggie Polizzi and her qualifications as an attorney and the hiring decision of a potential employer who ultimately decided, based on Simon Clark's words and his words alone, not to pursue Maggie Polizzi as a candidate at their firm in either their criminal or their civil departments. On the basis of a defamation claim, this is highly problematic to defendants. It cannot state that there is no evidence in the record that Simon Clark defamed Maggie Polizzi and that this had a negative impact on her, when it clearly had an impact on a firm's willingness to consider her for a position. In addition to Roger Warren from Melanson and Capps, there were two other individuals who received this lukewarm letter of recommendation. The first is Harriet Miller of Carter and Carroll. Unfortunately, the record does not disclose what Harriet Miller may or may not have discussed with Simon Clarke regarding Maggie Polizzi. We know that she received a letter of recommendation from Simon Clarke about Maggie Polizzi in early July, and we know that she called him on the 15th of July regarding Maggie Polizzi. However, what might have been said between the parties or additional hiring incentives or disincentives are not available in the record. However, there is also John Randall of Morrison and Farrow, who received the same letter of recommendation in late June. Now, on this particular letter of recommendation, the first of the three lukewarm letters of recommendation, there is a handwritten note from Simon Clarke, which he identified as his handwriting in his own deposition, which says, "Be careful with this one." Now again, according to the record, John Randall attempted to contact Simon Clarke regarding Maggie Polizzi, and he also put a note on that letter of recommendation that says, "Spoke to CSC, presumably Simon Clarke, not a good lateral candidate." Based on Roger Warren's explanation of his discussion with Simon Clarke, it is reasonable to assume that a similar conversation took place with John Randall, despite the fact that Simon Clarke assigned Maggie Polizzi to the Nita World case after she had a poor performance year, despite the fact that Simon Clarke worked closely with Maggie Polizzi up until the relationship ended, despite the fact that Nita Computer World commended her particularly at the completion of their job with Parker & Gould, and then later offered her a position themselves. This does not seem reflective of her qualifications, and as a partner at Parker & Gould, Simon Clarke had an obligation to provide a fair representation of her abilities. Now, there is a fourth letter of recommendation sent out by Simon Clarke available in the record in October of 2001, 3 months after any of the other letters of recommendation were sent out. Simon Clarke already knew that Maggie Polizzi was a well-qualified employee and simply did not want to have to confront her in the workplace in future. Therefore, he was providing lukewarm letters of recommendation and telling his colleagues to stay away from her on no factual basis. Now, in this fourth letter of recommendation, it is the only letter of recommendation that deviates from the lukewarm letter of recommendation. It is verbatim the letter of recommendation provided by Mr. Fuller, with the exception of a closing line of a personal nature. What is unique about this particular letter of recommendation is that it was provided after Parker & Gould had already missed a deadline to provide a statement regarding a discrimination claim. On June 30th of 2001, Parker & Gould received a notice of charge of discrimination and was provided with a deadline of August 1st to provide or to respond with a statement. This is according to Exhibit 14 of the record. Parker & Gould responded on September 1st, 1 month after the deadline provided. Realizing that it may have jeopardized its claim, could Simon Clarke have modified the letter of recommendation he sent out, not because he thought Maggie Polizzi was better suited to academia, because she clearly had strong capabilities in litigation, but because he wanted to mitigate any lost wages under a discrimination claim? On the basis of that late response, and on the basis of mitigating those damages down the road, Simon Clarke suddenly needed Maggie Polizzi to have a job. And that is why the letter of recommendation in October was glowing. Not because Simon Clarke had a change of heart or believed that Maggie Polizzi was particularly well suited to academia. but because he realized that in order to protect himself and the firm, Maggie Polizzi needed a paycheck. Now again, should this court not feel that the evidence of these 4 letters of credit is compelling to indicate that Simon Clark defamed Maggie Polizzi and that she suffered a detriment based on that defamation in the first 3 letters of credit and subsequent conversations with potential employers, then plaintiff respectfully requests this court, under Federal Rules of Civil Procedure 56D, grant time to plaintiff to remediate the insufficiency of such evidence. In particular, plaintiff would pursue evidence in the form of a deposition or affidavit from either Roger Warren or Harriet Miller, or ideally both these individuals. Thank you.